Charlotte Works is the workforce development board serving Mecklenburg County and your source for the latest labor market news. Hello and welcome. I'm Kevin Loux, the Chief Impact Officer at Charlotte Works, Mecklenburg County's workforce development. Today we'll be delving into the latest data and trends shaping our workforce, both nationally and locally. We'll start off with some high-level employment data, looking at overall employment and job postings. We'll zoom into specific sectors and analyze the trends shaping the sectors today. And then we'll wrap up with some employee-centric data, looking at career trajectories and what that means going forward. And so starting off with that employer-level data, you can see the recent study from the BLS ranks Charlotte as 12th out of 51 cities nationally for employment growth over the past year. And so that means that we had an increase of just over 30,000 more individuals were employed in the Charlotte Metro between November 2022 and November 2023. So again, indicative of a strong and robust regional economy with increasing employment. Looking at December for Mecklenburg County, we see we had over 40,000 job postings. However, that did represent about a 4% contraction from November. So something to keep an eye on to see if that contraction persists throughout the first quarter of 2024, or if it rebounds and puts us back on track for that strong employment growth that we've seen over the past year. Zooming into some specific sectors with emerging trends, we see the BLS recently released some data on the mental health sector, and you see strong employment growth projected for a lot of occupations in this sector. You see that red line on the screen represents the average growth of all occupations at 3%. And up at the top, you see those mental health counselors at almost 18% projected growth over the next 10 years. And all of these occupations are still expected to have strong occupational growth, outpacing the national average of all occupations. So again, an exciting sector to keep an eye on for our employment growth, both nationally and locally. And looking at some other sector data, the nonprofit industry, you see we have some recent analysis here that highlights the consistency and reliability of employment in this industry. So while we don't have pandemic era data yet, you see this ends in 2017, what we do see is going back to the Great Recession here between 2007 and 2010. You can see that sharp contraction in private sector employment was not experienced in the nonprofit sector. Steady growth between 2000 over that past decade, between 2007 and 2017, and didn't experience that same level of contraction that the private sector did. I do want to point out, you'll see the scales here are not the same. That for-profit employment is 10 times the size of nonprofit employment. So just because that graph is higher does not indicate that nonprofit employment is higher. Looking at the childcare sector, this is another interesting industry with some recent analysis to keep an eye on. Again, we know this industry is critical to supporting the workforce in all industries, and it was growing pre-pandemic, and it took until the first quarter of 2023 to surpass those pre-pandemic levels of employment because of that sharp contraction you see on the screen during the pandemic. Fundamentally, this recent research suggests that the pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in our childcare system that we can't ignore, because while this employment has surpassed pre-pandemic levels, we're still seeing lingering issues of low wages and employee turnover. So this is likely something that we will need to focus on from a policy perspective through employer engagement to make sure that these issues don't persist and that we can fundamentally support our workforce to ensure we have the adequate number of workers that we need going forward. Lastly, today I want to wrap up with some employee data. And so again, the BLS recently released findings on the average number of jobs that individuals hold throughout their lifetime. And so for those born between 1957 and 1964, they were averaging 12.7 jobs between the ages of 18 to 56. And so this fact is really illustrative of an evolving labor market. It really paints the picture of how our working lives are becoming more dynamic and reflecting more changes overall. You can see on the screen As men get more education, going from a high school diploma to a bachelor's degree, the average number of jobs they have throughout their career goes down from 14 to 12. And if you look at women, as they go from less than a high school diploma to a bachelor's degree or higher, their number of jobs tends to increase, going from 10 to 13. So suggesting that dichotomy between the education levels for men and women, whereas more education for men stabilizes them around 12, women, more education stabilizes them around 13. So we see that education really pushes those genders in different directions. Another interesting thing to point out about this 12.7 is there is a strong dichotomy between the stages of career that we see job shifts in. And so out of that 12.7, what we saw is that 6 of those 12 jobs happened before the age of 25. So that really indicates a strong need for mobility early in one's career to facilitate career progression. The job hopping trend that we've seen from baby boomers is likely something that is really just going to persist and continue to evolve over the next few years. We've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about younger generations moving jobs more frequently. And so we expect that career progression patterns will continue to be more fluid as technological advances persist. And we might see this number continue to grow as we do an analysis for Gen X and millennials throughout their career. And so this is something that really highlights the importance of evolving career pathways for our modern economy. A couple of other statistics I wanted to point out here is that in 2022, 63.8% of the working population worked at some point during the year. And so that was up from the prior year, but it's still 1% lower than pre-pandemic numbers. And 80% of those employed in 2022 were employed year-round. So when we look at this, we really see that individuals' employment, we've got to be able to understand what that looks like in the context of their career pathway, and how do we think about traditional career pathways in a more dynamic way to support individuals as they are shifting jobs. Another statistic I want to end on here is the rate of total separations. We see that remained constant in November. We did see a slight decrease in quits, but layoffs and discharges stayed about the same. And so again, that indicates that, like we saw in the job posting numbers in December, that individuals may be less likely to leave occupations right now as there are fewer jobs available. And we will see what happens in the first quarter of 2024 to see if that strong growth pattern from the prior year continues, or if we continue that contraction trend that started in December. And so that's all I have for you today, but I hope you enjoyed this quick labor market update.
For more information or for assistance as a business or a job seeker, visit charlotteworks.com.